Right, I believe I can get started now. Yes, Jeanette and Skag and Scamp team, I'm going to get started.
Yep, go ahead.
Great. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Jenna Hornstack. I'm Deputy Director of Planning for Land Use at Skag, the Southern California Association of Governments. And we're just really pleased to provide this special HCD webinar on the PLHA program for our Skag region. As most of you know, through the REAP program, or Regional Early Action Planning Grant Program, which is a state grant, Skag has had this huge opportunity to engage with our 191 cities and 6 counties on supporting your efforts to meet our region's RHNA goals, our Regional Housing Needs Allocation goals, and really support you in accelerating and streamlining housing production. The PLHA program is another great opportunity for your cities to take advantage of the many resources that the state is making available. And we're really pleased that our partners at HCD have agreed to a special session just for our Skag region. And from your sign up and interest, what we believe is that our attendance at this webinar is even better than many of the state's prior statewide webinars. So we're really excited that so many of you are interested and taking this opportunity to learn about this grant program. We also want to thank our partners with SCAMP, the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. Through our REAP program, we have been really fortunate to bring on SCAMP, hire them to support our REAP sub-regional partnership program. So many of you have been working with Wendy, but also they're supporting us with technical assistance. And this was the first opportunity that we found to really put that to work. And so what you'll hear later today, but I'll mention now, is that we will be able to offer one-on-one technical assistance on your PLHA applications through office hours with Wendy Silver, who you'll hear from today. And she's an experienced housing policy professional. She's an experienced grant writer. So it's a tremendous resource that we're able to bring forward to our cities and counties. Last thing, you're going to hear this a few times today, but we want to make sure you know to put any questions that you have in the Q&A section. So you should see a little button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. Please put your questions there and not in the chat. And that way we can track your questions and make sure they're answered. So really, again, just want to thank you for being here on behalf of Skag and SCAMP and HCD. And I'm going to turn it over to Danielle Cummings at HCD.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us. We are very excited to have this opportunity to share more information about the Permanent Local Housing Allocation Program with all of you. I just want to briefly mention the PLHA program is a program offered through the state that's an allocation. It's not competitive. It is an automatic allocation, and it is based on the 2017 CDBG funding structure. So some of you are receiving allocation directly, and some of you may have been under an urban county for that funding. And so the funding is actually going to the urban county with the intent that it be shared with all of those cities that are part of that urban county. The money comes from a $75 recording fee that is put on all real estate transactions. So the allocation is actually money that is garnered for real estate transactions within your jurisdiction. And the intent of that money is to come back to your community and hopefully help create more affordable housing opportunities. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to my team member, Kelsey. She's going to go over specifically delegation and the options for potentially, if you're not able to manage the funds yourself, that you do have other options for your PLHA funds so that they are not lost. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kelsey.
All right, thank you guys for being here. My name is Kelsey Barraza, and I'm going to talk to you today about delegating your PLHA funds. So what is a delegation? So that's when a jurisdiction is eligible to receive an allocation, but they don't want to manage the allocation and would rather delegate the entire allocation to another eligible local government or housing trust fund who can manage and take responsibility for that allocation. All right, and how does a delegation work? So when an eligible jurisdiction chooses to delegate their entire formula allocation to another jurisdiction or housing trust fund, the 5-year allocation becomes the complete responsibility of the delegate, and the original recipient of the formula allocation is no longer responsible in any way for submitting an application, managing the program, or submitting required PLHA reports. The delegate is responsible for developing the 5-year plan for PLHA, submitting the PLHA application in compliance with the Nofa, executing all PLHA documents, administering the formula allocation in compliance with program rules, and for submitting all required PLHA reports. The delegation cannot be canceled for the entire 5-year funding period. The current funding period includes the allocations from 2019 to 2023. So this means that if either party wants to cancel their agreement, they have to wait until the 2024 formula allocation is made available in the 2025 PLHA formula allocation Nofa. What makes jurisdictions eligible for a delegation? So both the recipient of the formula allocation and the delegate jurisdiction must be in compliance with housing element law as stated in PLHA guidelines section 302A, and must have submitted the housing element annual progress report as stated in PLHA guidelines section 302B. In addition, all required PLHA reports must have been submitted. What is required to delegate a formula allocation? So the eligible jurisdiction, that is the recipient of the formula allocation, and the delegate jurisdiction or local housing trust fund must execute a legally binding agreement setting forth their intentions and the responsibilities of each party. As noted above, the delegate is required to develop the PLHA 5-year plan and complete and submit the application on behalf of the jurisdiction who is the original recipient of the formula allocation. All right, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Danielle to discuss suggested uses for allocations.
So we know that some of the allocations being received by some jurisdictions is not a large amount, and so there may not be the option to do a bigger project such as an affordable housing development or a navigation center or things like that. So we did want to bring up that there are uses that can be done with a smaller allocation where the jurisdiction can still choose to keep their allocation rather than delegating it, and still have opportunity to use their money in their community. One of the things that I did want to bring up is I'm sure some of you have heard that California will be receiving approximately 5,000 Afghan refugees over the next couple of weeks. One of the things that is eligible for PLHA funds is a down payment assistance for housing, so long as that is a minimum of 6 months or more. So for example, for those of you that may potentially be receiving refugees without having enough funding to provide housing, I don't know exactly how that's all going to work out. So one of the options you do have as a community with a smaller allocation is you can look at using some of that money as a down payment assistance program for rental housing, for affordable payments for as long as it's, like I said, for a minimum of 6 months or more. And of course, any other ideas that you guys have about potentially partnering with each other. We do have one particular area, Newport Beach and Costa Mesa are partnering on a navigation center together. They're border cities, and so they have a navigation center I believe it's in the Costa Mesa side, but because it's right on the border with Newport Beach, they're actually being allowed to pool their funds together in order to fund that navigation center so that neither one of them is taking on quite the burden that it would be for just one of them to fund that navigation center alone. So there are different options like that. And so I do encourage you that if you have any ideas or you have any thoughts about ways that you want to use the money that maybe is not quite as spelled out in our Nofa, by all means, please ask us, because we're open to trying to find ways to keep the money in your community. So do we want to, if maybe we could go ahead and open, oh, the expenditure, sorry. There was one other piece that I did want to talk about, and that is expenditure guidelines. This chart that you're seeing, we recognized that we, as well as you guys, were having a very hard time keeping track of when the money needs to be applied for, as well as when it needs to be spent and or committed by. So one of the things that we did is we made this chart to try to explain the deadlines that are in place in regards to when you have to have the money applied for, as well as when it has to be expended by. So for example, right now we do have a Nofa open for the 2020 allocation, and that allocation, that money is available until the end of December. That Nofa is available for you to apply for until the end of December, December 31st of this year. However, the money for 2019 and 2020 can be applied for in the next round as well, the next Nofa that will be coming out in 2022, spring of 2022. That money can be applied for at that time. The caveat is that the 2019 allocation will revert to the MHP fund if it is not applied for by next year. So if you are wanting to wait until you have a little bit more money to work with, that's totally fine. But we do stress and encourage you to please apply if you have not applied yet for your 2019 allocation no later than that spring Nofa next year, because once that deadline passes, if the money is not applied for, you will still be able to access your 2020 and your 2021 allocation, but the 2019 allocation will revert to the MHP fund. If you have any additional questions, you can go ahead and send them to the team inbox at plha@hcd.ca.gov. We do ask that you give us at least 2 business days to respond to your questions, but we do try to respond within 48 hours if possible. Sometimes the questions require a little bit more research, so we may let you know that we're working on it, but it may take us a little bit longer. But if you have any questions, specific or general, please go ahead and email them to the team and we'll be happy to respond.
Thank you, Danielle. Again, this link is for questions that you may have after this webinar. We're going to have an interactive Q&A session with HCD right now. And I see that there are a few questions in the Q&A box. And while we're getting those compiled together, I just wanted to start with a couple of general questions that came up this week. Eligible activities. There are 10 eligible activities this round as compared to 8 from last round. Is that correct?
I believe there was always 10 eligible activities. I'll have to go back and look at the original Nofa, but I think there always was 10.
Okay. Would you be able to just briefly review the 10 eligible activities?
Sure. Hold on just a second. Let me pull those up.
Thank you.
I don't have them memorized.
No. Shall I ask another question while you're pulling that up?
Sure, go right. Oh wait, actually I've got that right now. Okay, so there's 10 eligible activities in the Nofa.
Are you able to, I'm sorry, you were able to share it on the screen by chance?
Let me see. I think I can do that. I've never worked within.
Danielle, I can go ahead and, oh, okay, got it.
Danielle, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, Kelsey, if you, yeah, I don't know why it isn't working. I don't usually work in Zoom. We usually work in Teams, so I'm not familiar with, I tried sharing it, but it's not coming up. I'm just going to start going through them though, so that we can keep going. So the first activity is the pre-development and development, acquisition, rehabilitation, and preservation of multifamily residential live, work, or rental housing that is affordable to extremely low, very low, low or moderate income households up to 120% of the area median income, or it can be up to 150% of the AMI in high cost areas. I want to go ahead and make sure that there is something to be known in regards to pre-development. Pre-development does not have a 1 year requirement like the other parts of the any of the other activities. You have only up to 1 year prior to apply for the funds. You can go ahead and apply for activities that you've started up to 1 year in advance. But with pre-development, there is not that same stipulation. So pre-development can be something that was started much further in advance, and we will go ahead and allow that under PLHA. The second activity is the same thing. It's the pre-development, development, acquisition, rehabilitation, and preservation of affordable rental, but ownership housing, as well as accessory dwelling units. So we are allowing ADUs is an option for jurisdictions to go ahead and use an eligible activity for ADUs. The only requirement that I'm going to go ahead and mention when in regards to ADUs is that we've had a lot of jurisdictions ask us if ADUs can be used in regards to development of plans. So typically, one of the big caveats of PLHA is that you can use the money for something like developing a plan for an ADU, a potential architecture plan. However, it's the same thing with pre-development money. There has to be, at the end of the 5-year period, we have to be able to show a result. So if you were to use the money, say, for example, to develop designs for ADUs that people could go ahead and put into place, and that help cut down on the cost of producing ADUs, that's fine, so long as there's actually an ADU that is results from that money being spent on those designs. So that you would have to be able to show that within that 5-year period that there was actually something being built as a result of using the money for that. So that would be the only other thing I would want to mention in regards to ADUs, because we get that question a lot. The matching portions of funds placed into a local, regional, or housing trust fund. That is another way, again, especially for smaller allocations, it's another way that you can keep the money in your area if you're not able to use the PLHA funds by themselves to produce a affordable housing development or a rental, an ownership opportunity or things like that. You can place the money into a housing trust fund as a matching. It is one of the few exceptions under the local housing trust fund program that allows PLHA funds to be considered matching. The other thing is the matching portions of funds that are available through low and moderate income housing asset fund. We haven't had anybody actually do that activity, so I'm not as familiar with that. But if someone was interested in that, we could certainly look it up and find out more information. That also goes to number 5, capitalized reserves for services connected to the preservation and creation of new permanent supportive housing. Again, that's not an activity that we have commonly had anyone take advantage of at this time. Activity 6 has a lot of work that we're doing on it. It still needs some more refinement. We did refine it this particular round. One of the things with PLHA is that we attempted to leave the program We attempted to leave the program as general as possible for people. We wanted to allow for a lot of wiggle room. And one of the problems that came up was that Activity 6 was a little too broad. And so people were attempting to use it for services and things that were actually not considered eligible. So for this particular NOFA, we did define it a little more specifically. We did say that you can use it for rapid rehousing. One of the things about rapid rehousing is the rapid rehousing does have to take place within your county. So if you're using rapid rehousing, it doesn't necessarily have to be, if you're a city, it doesn't necessarily have to be within your city, but it does have to be within your county. That would be the restriction. It cannot be used, rapid rehousing cannot be used to rehouse someone in another state or in another region. Rental assistance, which I was talking about earlier, for a term of at least 6 months, is an eligible PLHA use, as is street outreach, supportive case management services, the operating and capital costs for navigation centers, emergency shelters, and that includes the construction, rehabilitation, preservation of permanent and transitional housing. Number 7 is the accessibility modifications in lower income owner occupied housing. So we've typically seen that being used for senior housing. But it does have to be owner occupied, but accessibility modifications are also another opportunity to use funds if you don't have a huge allocation to offer accessibility modifications to your community. Efforts to acquire and rehabilitate foreclosed or vacant homes and apartments, that's number 8. Number 9 is home ownership opportunities, which it includes but is not limited to down payment assistance. And then finally, number 10 is the fiscal incentives that are made by a county to a city within the county. So the fiscal incentive can only be by a county offering to a city within the county a matching program to encourage the development of an affordable housing project. I think based on the participants of the program today, I don't think that will actually be applicable to this group, as most of you are trying to find ways to use the money for smaller. I don't think we have any counties that I'm aware of that are participating that haven't asked for their funds. So, and that's it.
Thank you, Danielle. And one other general question. If a jurisdiction did not apply to PLHA for their 2020 allocation, and they're choosing to apply this round for both their 2020 and their 2021 allocations, will they receive both allocations together in one lump sum? Or
sorry, so let me just go ahead and correct a couple things because it gets a little confusing. Mm-hmm. So what they would be applying for this year would be the 2019 and the 2020 allocation. So they're actually not tied to the calendar year, they're tied to the budget. So that's when so we're basically giving the money out after the fact, after it's been collected, so the year after. So they can apply for, when they put in the application, they would be applying for both of those allocations. And again, next year, the same thing, they'd be applying for all 3 years of allocation if they hadn't applied yet. But as far as the expenditure, or as far as the disbursement of the money, they would actually have to complete a disbursement form for each year's allocation separately. So they don't necessarily receive it all at once unless they're applying for it all at once. And then they would just need to meet those requirements.
So the jurisdiction could put 100% in year 1 for the same activity that they put 100% in year 2. And this way they could have the combination of those 2 years allocation to go to the same project.
Yeah, so the 5-year plan, when they apply, they're going to put in a 5-year plan for what they're going to do with 100% of their allocation over that 5-year period. And then however the allocation's being spent each budget year, is how the money would be expected once it's dispersed, would be expected how it's being applied.
Okay. Thank you. And just to confirm, this isn't the last year for losing your 2019 allocation. HCD
No, that would be next year.
Yes, it's extending it to next year. So nothing will be lost, but we do encourage people to apply for their 2019 and 2020 allocation now before December 31st.
Yes.
Good. There are a few Q&A questions that have come up. Some are being answered by your staff, but here is a question for you. Would the down payment assistance be made to make purchases of single family residences?
Yes. So if you're doing activity 2, or excuse me, I forgot, I have to go back and look at the activity numbers. There is, one of the activities is for home ownership, and it does include, I think it was like, was that activity 6 or something? Let me see. There is an activity number 9. So activity 9 is an activity for home ownership opportunities, including down payment assistance. And yes, that would be for single family residences, not required, nor would we actually encourage you to try to do multiple family residences with that program.
Thank you. I have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a few jurisdictions that have contacted us regarding being in an urban county cooperative agreement. And could you please speak to how it's determined that a city is in an agreement? Can you explain how the county distributes the funds to the various cities? And also, for cities that are in an urban county program, can they access the non-competitive, the competitive or non-competitive programs?
Okay, so the first part of the question in regards to how we decided who would receive an allocation and who was part of an urban county, who would not receive their own allocation, that was actually from HUD's website in regards to the CDBG funds, so the 2017 CDBG funds. So based on how how HUD identified each city and county at that time was the information that we used to determine who would receive a PLHA allocation individually and who was considered part of an urban county. So those cities that were part of an urban county under CDBG, basically meaning that the CDBG funds were distributed to the county under HUD's program, is the same way that we mirrored that with the PLHA program. So I don't know going forward for the next 5 years. I haven't asked yet how that's going to be determined, if it's going to follow the same pattern. But for right now, anyone who's part of an urban county and did not show themselves on the list, the PLHA Nofa eligible list in Appendix A, if your city is not listed there, it's because you're part of an urban county. And that urban county has what we call a moral obligation to share their funds with you in a way that you all agree on. So I would encourage cities to contact their urban county to find out how those funds are being pooled amongst the urban city, amongst those urban cities that are a part of that urban county. There are some counties that have a formula that they're using. Some are doing it in a case-by-case basis, depending on if the city actually wants to participate. And some counties are choosing to do a county-wide project. So I would encourage you to contact them to find out what exactly they're doing. We did not require the urban county to share those funds, but we are highly encouraging them to do so. And if you are having problems with the county that is not sharing those funds and or doing a countywide project, please contact us and we will definitely try to arbitrate with you.
Thank you. So any jurisdiction that was in an urban county cooperative agreement at the beginning of this 5-year period, then for this 5 years, it will go through the county. And we don't know yet what HUD has decided for the next 5 years.
Right. Yeah, that part I do need to ask because it is something that keeps coming up. So I will definitely start inquiring to find out what our plan is. I don't know if we're going to be using the same formula or not. I have to look at the guidelines and try to figure out, what the plan was. In regards to the second question, in regards to the competitive program, so the competitive PLHA program is a set aside from the original formula. It's a percentage set aside, and that money is only eligible to those jurisdictions that are listed again in the Appendix A of that Nofa. Those cities that are listed there are eligible, or counties, excuse me, both cities and counties are eligible to apply for the competitive Nofa if they are listed in there. They can also, we are part of that program. The difference is from PLHA formula is that we're looking for, excuse me, a partnership with either a developer or a nonprofit for that program, which is one of the big differences between PLHA formula, because PLHA formula does not require that. A city or a county can pretty much use the funds however they want. They don't necessarily have to partner with anyone. I mean, obviously, most of the time it works out easier, but competitive, that is one of the big differences, is that you do have to partner with someone.
Thank you. If a jurisdiction receives funds but doesn't spend it all by the time frame designated, what happens?
If they receive the funds but they don't spend it by the time frame, then the money will, if they actually have received the funds, then potentially the funds could be requested to be returned, because any funds that are not committed and expended by the, or excuse me, actually there is an expenditure date. Committed is a little bit different. If the funds are not expended by those dates in that chart that I showed earlier, the money can be requested by HCD to be returned, and it would be reverted to the MHP fund. I would hope that we would never have that instance. I'm really hoping that we can all work together. That will not be an issue at all, but that unfortunately is the consequence.
Good. There's a question here. Is the 20% AOWH required for any and all eligible funding activities?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I'm trying to...
Is the 20% AOWH required for any and all eligible funding activities?
So the AOWH is not required for all activities. It's required for those activities. I believe activity 2 mentions it. And that's basically what it is. It's affordable ownership and workforce housing. And so the idea was that the 20% funding out of all the PLHA funds, so out of the entire thing, that would be met on the natural. So, maybe one jurisdiction might do more than another, and that's okay as long as we meet that 20% goal. It will be something that we'll be looking at next year to see whether or not people have actually, whether we're meeting that goal, whether we are actually where we need to be to meet that goal. If for any reason we have not done that math yet, but if for some reason we are not, then there will be a restriction placed on the future Nofa that the focus will have to be on that type of housing in order to use the PLHA funds. But that was something that we were really hoping won't be necessary, based on just people naturally choosing those types of developments and eligible activities.
Thank you. One attendee has asked about activity 6, assisting persons who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. They want to know how they answer the questions regarding projected households and period of affordability in your spreadsheet application.
So depending on what the activity is, there's a lot of activities under activity 6. There's a lot of subcategories. So the projected households, one of the things about activity 6 that's really important to remember is that you can only work with, it has to be a 30% or less AMI to qualify for activity 6. So that's one thing. The other thing, as far as period of affordability goes, the period of affordability is 55 years for a navigation center or a homeless shelter or transitional housing or that sort of thing. But that 55-year period is not obviously, not an issue for the street outreach or the rental assistance program or things like that.
So what would a jurisdiction put in their application if they are going to do a shelter, a homeless shelter with 15 beds? Would that give
Yeah,
them
I would just, if they think they could, yeah, I was gonna say, if they think they're gonna be able to serve, there's 15 beds, it sounds like they're gonna be able to serve 15 people. So yeah, I mean, it's really, the thing about that kind of stuff is it really is your best estimate. We're not going to slap anyone's hand if they serve 10 families instead of 15, because that's just how it worked out in the reporting. I guess we're just looking for people to do their best estimate based on the space that they have and the funds received.
Thank you. There's a question about APR, Annual Progress Report. We understand from your earlier slide that the housing element needs to be in compliance, as well as the APR needs to be in compliance, submitted on time at the time of before any disbursement can occur of PLHA funds. What if a jurisdiction did submit their APR, but they submitted it late?
Yeah, so that's basically, that's all that's going to happen is that we tell applicants they're welcome to turn in their application at any time. They just won't receive the money until everything's in compliance. So the only thing that it will do, being late, is that it will just hold up the ability for us to disperse the funds, even if it's awarded and approved, until everything is received.
On that note, this hasn't come in as a jurisdiction question, but I will go ahead and ask it for all of those who are wondering. If a jurisdiction is not in full compliance with their housing element, that's due in a matter of days, are they still able to apply for PLHA funds?
Yes. Again, we're encouraging jurisdictions to put in their application. And one of the reasons that we're doing that, even though you may not be able to receive the actual allocation itself to be dispersed until that compliance is met, is because we want to ensure that the application that you turn in is fully ready to go and be awarded. And sometimes there's some fine tuning that's needed, or we need to work with the applicant a little bit to meet all of the pieces of the plan that might be a little confusing or might need some help and some work with. And so we would rather be working on that and doing that and completing it while they're also at the same time becoming compliant. We don't want to wait till that last minute, and we do encourage jurisdictions. It's totally fine. We want you to apply because, again, if there's anything that we need corrected, if for any reason your resolution is altered from the template that we've provided, things like that, we want to be able to have that communication with you before the last minute, so that if there's any corrections that need to be done, we can be working on those, so that by the time your housing element or your progress reports or any of those things are that weren't in compliance become in compliance, you're ready to go ahead and request your disbursement, because disbursements can take up to 6 to 8 weeks from the time of request to receive. So we want to make sure that everything else is ready to go for you.
So no jurisdiction, no eligible jurisdiction is prevented from applying prior to December 31 for
Right.
this round and last rounds, allocations, and of course the future ones, because of any compliance issue, because there will be a chance to correct any compliance issue, and therefore their application will already be there, most likely analyzed and ready to go.
Right. The
Wonderful.
only thing I'll mention is that for any reason that compliance doesn't get completed and approved prior to the next Nofa coming out, that's when we would have to reject the application and start over with the new Nofa. We'd have to have a new application and start over. But most of the time, I think we're all in agreement that I think because of the ability to apply for PLHA up until the 31st of December, it does provide a long period for those corrections and those opportunities to come into compliance. So
Thank
the
you.
next Nofa won't be out until at least April of next year. So March or late March to April of next year.
Thank you. I believe you may have already touched on this, but I think it's a good question to make sure everyone understands the answer to. If a jurisdiction has leftover funds from a prior year, can those funds just roll over to the next funding cycle?
Yes, so I'm going to answer that in two ways because I think it's kind of, there's two possible scenarios that could happen in that situation. One scenario is that if an applicant has not previously applied, then yes, their allocation would roll over. And when they make that application, they would be applying for the previous year's allocations. And like we talked about, there's just that one caveat that when we start 2019, next year is the last year to apply for it. If a jurisdiction already has applied, has received disbursement, and is now applying for their second allocation, which we call a streamlined application, because it's basically just a one-page application. You're not redoing your plan, your resolution, all of those things. You're just doing a one-page certification that everything's still the same and we're all in agreement that we're just moving forward with the next allocation. Yes, they can still receive that allocation even if they haven't spent the first one completely. And there's that gets into a little bit of another sticky part. So what happens is there is in our Q&A, and I do recommend that everybody take a look at the Q&A when you have an opportunity. There is under there a definition of commitment. And we do reference guideline 300E that there is a part in there which shows 3 different scenarios of amount of funding received. And so based on the amount of funding that the jurisdiction is receiving, there is a limit of how much money they can hold uncommitted before they can receive their next allocation. Most of us are not going to even come, this is not going to be something that will come into play probably until next year. But I do want to mention it because it is good to just kind of be aware of it, because it's not that the money has to be completely spent. It's just that the money has to be committed, which goes back to that definition of commitment. And I don't, like I said, I don't want to just paraphrase it here because it's really a very important definition. And I do encourage you to kind of go and read it and understand it, because that can be the difference between receiving your next allocation while not necessarily having spent everything. We're not requiring you to have spent everything. We just want to make sure that people are not, I guess what the legislature was trying to do was not allow people to receive the money, hold on to it for indefinitely and not spend it. They really wanted to make sure that there was a plan, that people actually had a plan for how they were going to spend the money, and actually made a commitment to do so. There was some concern that potentially that applicants might accept the money and kind of put it away in a rainy day fund, and that was something they wanted to avoid, because the program is going to cycle every 5 years. So this will be continuing into another 5-year cycle after this one.
Thank you. There is, again, I believe you touched on this, the eligible activity regarding ADUs. There's a question that asks, can PLHA funds be used to finance the construction of ADUs?
Yes, PLHA funds can be used to construct ADUs, but we are requesting that the owner and the tenant be income eligible for that funding. So that is for the construction, and that there be at least a 1-year lease, as well as at a minimum, we recommend a 20-year affordability period, but we are encouraging there to be, we would like to see a 20, but at the very minimum, we're asking for a 5-year affordability period for the construction of ADUs.
There are a couple of questions that want to know about 1 year versus 5 year. The allocations are annually, but there's an estimate of what the total would be at the end of 5 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when creating the resolution that needs to go for adoption at council or board of supervisors, we ask for the 5-year number, that maximum number, to be approved, because we are looking at the estimate of the entire 5 years allocation.
That's correct.
Okay. And the full application only needs to be done once during the 5-year period.
Yes, the only time, the only time that would be, that you would be redoing the entire application is if you wanted to make an amendment. So keep in mind that that's another thing that can be good or bad depending on how you feel about the PLHA program, is that even though you're telling us that this is your plan for 5 years, we are, other than a delegation is a commitment. Once you've made it, that's it. It's delegated. It cannot be reversed. However, if you are applying for the funds under your own application, you can make a change to that program plan over that 5-year period, and basically it's an amendment. So that's when you would redo your resolution, you would redo your plan, tell us how you want it to change. And that can be because, circumstances within the community have changed. How the money, we've had some jurisdictions that wanted the money for a particular project and they found other funding for that project. So they wanted to funnel PLHA to something else. Or the community had a change of need and something that they thought they were going to be able to do. They're like, actually, we really need to fund this over here instead. So that is an option. So you only are doing a single application, and if you're not making any changes in the future, if that's your plan and you're set with it and you're good, then you will not need to redo that every year. But if at any point during the process you want to change how you're using the money, and it's basically it's more than 10%, so you can make a change of your funding within an activity, or from one activity to another. As long as it's 10% or less, you will not need to redo your application. If you're making a major change with your funding allocation, where you're changing what the percentages of a particular eligible activity, more than 10%, then potentially you would need to do an amendment. We always encourage people at that point, if you think that's something you're looking at doing, to contact us so that we can make sure to walk you through that process and figure out if it's really necessary. Because certainly if we can avoid having you go back to council for another resolution and things like that. If we think there's a way we can work with you around that, because it might be a subcategory change or something like that, we definitely want to do that. We want to save you that extra work if we can.
Great. Thank you. We have more questions and answers. However, I just want to take a quick commercial break to let you know that in addition to this webinar, Skag is offering free technical assistance with questions and, more importantly, the actual application assistance, helping jurisdictions come up with their 5-year plan, putting that application together, helping you submit it online. Skag would like to support any jurisdiction that has been unable to, for any reason, get their PLHA funds. So I don't know if you can put this up on screen right now, but in all of your email reminders, there's been a link to scheduling one-on-one technical assistance, free consulting advice. And it's also in your chat right now, the link to schedule. So before any more of our participants fall off the line during the Q&A period, I wanted to make sure that you know that Skag will help you as best as you can to discuss partnerships, delegation, help you with your application, etc. Back to Q&A. Will the ADU construction, if financed with PLHA funds, be subject to prevailing wage?
So most of HCD's programs are subject to prevailing wage. PLHA is a little bit different because it is an allocation. So the PLHA program itself is not looking, it's not something that we're looking for ourselves. We don't request that information. We're not going to be checking for it. However, we do encourage you to consult with your legal department, because even though we're not looking for it and we're not requiring it in your reporting, it is possible. It usually is a state mandate. So I would encourage you talking to your legal department to find out if your particular project would fall under those requirements, so that you don't run into a problem, maybe not with us, but in the future with other parts of the state that are looking at those sorts of things.
Okay. Again, this is something you may have touched on before. Can you clarify the idea of a period of affordability for transitional housing?
Yes, so transitional housing, affordable housing developments, navigation centers, and emergency shelters all would require a 55-year affordability period.
And how would HCD want to see the compliance in that matter?
Through a regulatory agreement. So it would be part of the regulatory agreement. And I believe it's also mentioned, I don't have a sample up right now, but I believe it's also in our standard agreement as well. It would be part of the standard agreement paperwork as well.
Can you please clarify the scenarios in which down payment assistance would qualify? You mentioned that this would not apply to multifamily housing. So do you only mean apartments? That doesn't make sense.
Okay, so yeah, so
be applied to down payment assistance for condos or community land trusts that are used to preserve housing affordability.
Okay, so when we're talking about down payment assistance, we're only talking about home ownership opportunities. So what we're talking about there, and I apologize, I realized when you asked that, when that previous question was asked in regards to single family residents, I did not mean to exclude that it could not be used for one side of a duplex or a condo or something like that. It is down payment assistance is only available for home ownership opportunities. So anything to do with renting would fall under activity 6, and that would be that rental assistance program that has to be a minimum of 6 months, for example. Or it could be part of the rapid rehousing program as well. But again, that comes under the 30% or less AMI qualifications.
Correct. If you were going to use PLHA funds for the rehabilitation of transitional housing, would there still be an affordability period?
Yes.
So in any way, new construction or rehab, there needs to be an affordability period for
Yes,
transitional housing.
that's correct.
There's a question coming from San Juan Capistrano. If San Juan Capistrano received CDBG funds from the state in 2017, but now they have a county cooperative agreement, they are able to go through the county, correct?
Okay. If San Juan Cap is an eligible PLHA participant, applicant, under Appendix A of the Nofa, if they show, because they weren't at that time part of that urban county agreement, if they were in fact received their own CDBG funds, and so therefore they're under the PLHA program as an eligible participant, they can go through the county, but it would be a delegation. So that would be kind of what we were talking about, what Kelsey was outlining earlier, where there would be the county would apply for that PLHA application of the city on the city's behalf, and it would become the county's responsibility as well as the county's choice of how that money is used. So as long as the money was being used within the county, whether it be used specifically in San Juan Cap or not, the money would be the county's responsibility, and it would be for a commitment of the entire 5-year allocation. And there would not be an option to, that would not be an option to change. That's one thing, again, about delegations that's really important, is that once you delegate to another entity, that entity has it for the entire 5-year period. And so you would have to wait till the next cycle to decide what you want to do with your funds in the future.
So if the County of Orange used Activity 10 to provide funds to San Juan Cap, and they want to use it for development, is that a correct scenario?
So Activity 10 is that one where a county can incentivize a city to build an affordable development. And so with that, what basically happens there is that whatever amount the county is using, however much money the county is giving to the city to make that incentive, the city then has to match or be greater than in order for that to be eligible under Activity 10.
Thank you. We have just 2 more questions left. Coming up on the hour mark, we allowed an hour and a half if there are more questions. You can also follow up with scheduling a free technical assistance session and or emailing the PLHA email at HCD with your questions. But here we go. Did I hear correctly that both an ADU owner and the tenant must be income qualified? With the relaxed zoning for ADUs, there may be an opportunity to use PLHA funds toward the development of ADUs on property owned by low income and non-low income owners.
So originally, our position was that both the owner and the tenant have to be income qualified. We are considering relaxing that requirement for exactly the reason that you mentioned. If we think that we can get more affordable housing created as a result of relaxing that requirement, we are open to it. So I would encourage you to reach out to us directly if that's something that you're looking at doing, so that we can kind of look at your area to see whether or not I can use it as part of my, reasoning for supporting why we should be making that change. Because that is something that we are considering, relaxing that a little bit, because we do know that there are particular areas that maybe are not going to run into a low income situation, but owners may not be as willing to build an affordable housing unit without the assistance. So
There's another few questions. If a jurisdiction chooses to use their funds for operation expenses on a navigation center, does that trigger the 55-year covenant?
No. So if the navigation center itself is something that already exists and you're not using the PLHA funds to construct it, then yes, then that's not going to trigger a 55-year covenant, because the money is being used for potentially, I'm guessing in most cases, the cities are contracting with a nonprofit to run that shelter. And so really the money that you're providing is going to that shelter provider to run that navigation center. So in that particular instance, what would be required, and what I want to go ahead and mention, because it actually came up in one of our meetings today, is in order to receive the funding for PLHA, if you're using it for the operation of a navigation center, I just want to mention that we would need to see the contract between the applicant and the shelter operator and or nonprofit, however you guys were, if the city itself was not the operator. We would need to see that contract as part of the process of releasing the funds. So just a FYI to anyone that's looking at that particular activity, like I said, it happened to come up today that we couldn't release someone's funds because we didn't have that contract yet.
There have been a couple of questions about the 10 eligible activities. I don't know if you were ever able to put something up on screen or not.
It's basically, it's in the Nofa. So if you go to our the HCD website, to the PLHA program page, if you go to the formula Nofa, all 10 activities are listed. Well, they're also listed in the guidelines as well, but you can find it under eligible activities in the Nofa really quickly. So that I would recommend just kind of opening that notice of funding and scrolling to eligible activities, and you'll find all 10 defined in a little more detail than I was saying. It's also in the guidelines as well, but if you want to quickly find them, they're in the Nofa.
And looks like we have one last question, second to last, regarding down payment assistance. Would the income guidelines be moderate income up to 120% of AMI?
I believe so. I think the guidelines define that in activity 2, and then in high cost areas, I think it can even go up to 150.
For those people who had asked about seeing the Nofa and the 10 eligible activities, Kelsey has put in the chat the link to the PLHA Nofa notice of funding availability. Before we discuss our last question and sign off, just to wrap up, it seems to me, and not just because we're partnering on this webinar, Danielle, but it seems to me that this PLHA program, like you said, has been put together so generally that there are so many options and opportunities and, dare I say, exceptions, maybe not, that a jurisdiction can take advantage of as long as they work together with HCD, ask the questions, try it out. It's money that's allocated, it's free to the eligible jurisdictions, and I believe HCD as well as Skag and SCAMP and everyone collaborating on this webinar would like to help the jurisdictions to make the most of that money. This isn't a crazy competitive process that it's dog eat dog. It's working together. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we totally agree, Wendy. It is so important to me and my team that this money, as much as possible, be spent in the community that it was collected. We really see the importance with trying to help that community have that money go back to their community in a way that actually, would be helpful. Which is why, yes, I definitely want to stress that if there's something that you're thinking of doing, it may or may not be eligible. And there may be opportunities where I'm able to argue an exception because of a particular community need. So there may be something that looks like it's not eligible, based on our guidelines or, based on what you're reading in the Nofa. But if you reach out to us, we can look at, we recognize that each community has its individual needs. We also really encourage, like we've kind of briefly talked about during the slide presentation, that if you are bordering with another city and you guys are sharing some of the same services, some of the same population and things like that, that there may be opportunities that we can work with you that may not be obvious in the Nofa or the eligible activities, in ways that you guys can partner to share your funds to try to serve both of your communities. So yes, we are happy to take an email. We're happy to schedule an individual phone call where you kind of run through your ideas and things like that. We have been known to tell people no and say, you know what, initially this doesn't look like it's eligible, but let's meet and talk about it. And we have changed our mind because they were able to make a good argument of why it made sense for their community. So if we can do it and it does not offend the spirit or the intent of the PLHA program, we will 100% try to make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Couple of last minute questions. Can down payment assistance be used in coordination with a USDA 502 loan?
PLHA is a program that does not have any restrictions for partnering. So PLHA can be partnered with any other funding sources, so long as that particular funding source doesn't have an issue with it. So as long as that whatever other funding sources you're looking at, and that includes other HCD programs as well. So if you're receiving money from other HCD programs, if they don't have a restriction for stacking, PLHA has no restriction on stacking funds.
Great. I have one tip that I'd like to share with people before we take this last question. Another question came in. And Danielle, I'd like to know if you agree with me on this. We may think, oh, it's only September 21st. I have until December 31st to put in my application. However, what an applicant, a jurisdiction must keep in mind is that there are two items that need to go to your council or board of supervisors. One is a resolution that authorizes the application for the entire 5-year amount. And the second is even more important, and that is your 5-year PLHA plan, where you designate which activities you're going to use. That needs to go to a public hearing in your jurisdiction, a noticed public hearing, and then that PLHA plan will be discussed and voted on at that public hearing, and then a resolution documenting the adoption of that plan would be created. So please keep in mind, for those of you who have city councils and board of supervisors who go dark around the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas time and New Year's, we need to get those done. Those are very important steps. And starting on your PLHA 5-year plan is really important, and we should get started on it now. So please feel free to contact me if you need any help. Contact Danielle. And our closing question is, what's the difference between entitlement and non-entitlement eligibility?
Okay, so I always hate when someone asks this question because I am not well versed in this. It is in the guidelines, and I will tell you that it's in the definition of the guidelines, so I'm going to read it from there. It is a CDBG HUD definition, and so we refer to it again. It's based on a little more technical than I got into in regards to how the funding disbursement was decided. And so we basically were using CDBG's their guide, their information as a guide of like how PLHA was going to be distributed. So that term is actually from them. And so it is, the non-entitlement is defined in the guidelines as a local government in an area which is not a metropolitan city or part of an urban county. So it's a local government that as of September 1st, 2017, was an incorporated city with a population of less than 50,000, or a county with an unincorporated area population of less than 200,000 persons, that also had not entered into a 3-year cooperation agreement with another area. So the entitlement is areas in which the population is not only is it larger, but it's also places where they were considered either a metropolitan city and or part of an urban county. So keeping in mind that a city can be part of an urban county, but still have their own allocation, because it really had to do with those CDBG agreements, those cooperative agreements back. The date that, like I said, that they used was 2017. So anyone that was part of a cooperative agreement in 2017 was therefore part of that urban county. And if they were not part of a 2017 CDBG agreement, then they were considered their own applicant. So there's kind of like two caveats to this. So a non-entitlement is a smaller non-metropolitan city. An entitlement is what's considered a larger metropolitan area and or a city that is part of what's considered an urban county. But those, being an entitlement does not necessarily mean that you didn't receive an allocation of your own, but it all had to do with the 2017 CDBG agreement. So some were part of that and they did not receive their own allocation, and some were not and received their own allocation. I encourage people, to be honest with you, not to get too tied up in the technical terms, because in the end, what we want to look at is whether or not you're an eligible applicant.
And that eligibility is, I believe, attachment A to the Nofa.
Yeah, Appendix A of the Nofa shows all of the eligible participants.
Right. That will give you your answer instead of trying to figure out entitled, non-entitled.
Yeah, it's probably a better,
eligible.
It's an easier focus. Yeah.
Yeah. So check your Nofa Appendix A. We're going to be signing off soon. I wanted to give everyone just one last chance to look at the chat, and you might want to link to the Nofa or the scheduling before we sign off. Danielle, is there anything you would like to say in closing?
Oh, I would just like to thank everyone for for participating. We really appreciate again, your time and the opportunity to try to give you more information that I hope helps you to make a decision about applying. And again, we are here for any assistance you need via email, or we can set up a phone call and assist you that way. We just want to encourage everyone to try to take advantage of, as Wendy said, this is free money. It's not competitive, and it does belong to your community. So whatever we can do to make sure it gets there.
Thank you, Danielle. And thank you everyone for being in this webinar this morning. You have an extra 15 minutes that's been uncalendared for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you again, Danielle, Kelsey, Myrani and Naya from Skag, Jenna Hornstock from Skag, Jeanette Brown, and Olivia Olmos from SCAMP. We thank you very much, and you will receive a follow-up email with lots of links to recordings and PowerPoint slides, etc. Thank you again. Bye-bye.